My name is Alina, I'm 32, and that Thursday evening I came home with grocery bags cutting into my palms and found the front door chained from the inside. If you've ever faced something like this, comment where you're reading from. The hallway smelled faintly of boiled cabbage and cigarette smoke from the downstairs neighbor. The stairwell bulb flickered, humming like it was tired of staying alive. My right hand was stiff from the weight of 2 plastic bags, a loaf of rye bread, a jar of olives, and 3 cans of tuna that rattled each time I shifted. I bent to fit the key, twisted once, then again. Nothing. The lock refused me like I was a stranger. Inside, muted music thumped, bass lines heavy, careless laughter spilling through the crack. I knocked. A pause. Then the chain slid just far enough for a face to appear. My brother's wife, hair messy, holding a cigarette between painted nails. "Oh," she said. Her tone was flat, but her smile curved like she'd won something. "We've decided it's not fair anymore. You'll need to pay if you want to keep staying here. Back rent, utilities, everything. 42,000 euros should cover it. My son deserves a holiday." The number landed heavier than the bags in my hands. 42,000. I swallowed, felt the dry rasp of my throat. "You changed the lock?" She shrugged, ash falling to the floor. "My house, my rules." "Your brother agrees." Behind her, I glimpsed him, bare chest, beer in hand, deliberately not meeting my eyes. On the sofa, their boy sprawled across my quilt, gaming console glowing in his lap. The weight of years pressed down on me. I had paid bills. I had repaired that leaky bathroom pipe myself last December when they refused to call a plumber. And yet here I was, bags digging deeper into my fingers, shut out like a tenant behind on rent. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I only shifted the groceries to one arm, pulled the key free, and said quietly, "Understood." The chain slid shut. Laughter rose again. My legs moved on their own down the staircase, past peeling paint, past the neighbor's stroller, into the night air that smelled of petrol and damp concrete. I sat in my car with the tuna cans still clattering in the bag. I didn't cry. I stared at the steering wheel until the outline blurred. What they didn't know, in 29 days, the truth would arrive on paper, signed and stamped. The next morning I sat in the kitchen of the hospital staff lounge, fluorescent light buzzing above me, a chipped mug of instant coffee steaming against my palms. The plastic table bore carved initials and a sticky ring of someone's forgotten cola can. My shift had ended at 7:40 a.m., but I wasn't ready to face the empty car waiting outside. I scrolled through my phone. 17 missed calls. 14 messages. All from my brother and his wife. The first said, "Don't overreact." The last, sent at 3:12 a.m., simply read, "Pay or leave." No exceptions. The taste of coffee was bitter, almost metallic. I closed my eyes and let the noise of the vending machine mask my breathing. A colleague dropped into the seat across from me, unwrapping a sandwich that smelled of pickles and fried onions. He glanced at me. "Rough night?" I forced a smile. "Something like that." I didn't tell him that my hands still smelled faintly of bleach from cleaning trauma rooms, that my own apartment key had turned useless overnight, that 42,000 euros now hung over my head like a ransom note. Instead, I opened my notebook. On the first page was a to-do list I had scribbled days ago: buy cat food, renew insurance, call mother's lawyer. That last line made my pulse quicken. I had put it off for months, busy with double shifts, convinced it wasn't urgent. Now the ink seemed heavier, like it had been waiting for this very moment. By 10:15 a.m., I was back in my car, the upholstery still smelling faintly of wet wool from my coat. My phone buzzed again. A voice message. "You owe us, Alina. After all these years under our roof. 42,000 by the end of the month. Don't test us." I pressed save. My fingers didn't tremble. Instead, I wrote the date in the margin of my notebook. When I drove past the building on Kurova Street, I looked up at the 4th-floor balcony. The quilt, my quilt, hung there in the wind like a flag. Their flag. Something inside me tightened. I whispered to the steering wheel, I won't do this anymore. And for the first time, the words didn't feel like a wish. They felt like a plan. How did it come to this? That question echoed in me as I parked outside the old library where I used to study as a teenager. The square smelled of roasted chestnuts from a vendor cart, though the cold made my fingers ache as I sat gripping the steering wheel. There were good years once. After my mother died when I was 14, my brother and I clung to each other. He was older by 5 years, protective in his way. He'd walk me home from school, leave notes on the fridge when I studied late, don't forget to eat. Back then, the apartment was still ours. The wallpaper smelled faintly of my mother's rose soap, her shawl draped over the armchair like she'd return any minute. Then came his marriage. His wife moved in with her suitcase of perfumes, loud laughter, and constant cigarettes. The curtains changed, the furniture shifted, and slowly, my mother's touches vanished. The shawl disappeared. The framed photos went into a drawer. Every time I asked, she'd shrug, old things should be put away. I stayed through medical school, contributing every month, half the rent, half the bills, sometimes more when their son needed school fees or a new computer part. No one called it charity. I thought of it as family. But after I started working full-time at the hospital, earning a salary that looked impressive on paper but disappeared into loans and night shift meals, the tone changed. They began to remind me that it was their apartment. That I was lucky to stay. One night last winter, I found a receipt for a hotel tucked under the couch cushion, 2 nights, city center, spa package for 2. My brother's wife brushed it off, a gift from friends. But when I asked why I had covered the utility bill alone that month, she only smiled thinly. I ignored it, telling myself peace was worth more than fairness. But the debts piled up, debts that weren't mine. The apartment felt less like home, more like a cage with rent collectors inside. And now, with one lock changed and a ransom of 42,000 euros demanded, the illusion was gone. What was at stake wasn't just money. It was the last piece of ground my mother had left us. I realized then, if I surrendered, they would take it all, her memory, my dignity, the roof itself. I sat on the library steps, notebook open, pen scratching against the paper. At the top of the page I wrote in block letters, apartment, proof. For the first time in years, I felt the beginnings of resolve. It happened on a gray Monday evening, the kind of cold that makes metal bite your fingers. I had finally forced myself to unlock the fireproof box my mother left in the back of my closet. The hinges creaked, the smell of paper and old cedar filling the room. Inside were documents, yellowing report cards, her university diploma, and beneath them, a thick envelope with my name written in her script, sharp, elegant letters that still made my throat tighten. I sat cross-legged on the floor, the envelope balanced on my knees. My cat pawed at the edge, but I shooed him away gently. My fingers were unsteady as I slid the contents free, several folded pages, notarized, bearing blue stamps and signatures. It was an addendum to her will, dated 2009, 2 years before her accident. The apartment was listed clearly as her separate property, purchased before marriage, to be transferred entirely to me when I reached 30. My brother's name wasn't on it. No one else's was. I stared at the lines, the numbers of the cadastral register, the precise address, Kurova Street, flat 42. My flat. My mother's handwriting appeared at the bottom, and I felt the weight of her presence in the room, the smell of rose soap, the faint rustle of shawl against skin. I whispered, "You knew I'd need this." The radiator clicked in the silence, metal expanding with heat. I read every word twice, then 3 times, and each time the clarity sharpened. They had demanded 42,000 euros for my own inheritance. They had changed the lock on a door that was legally mine. I laid the document flat on the coffee table and took a photograph. The blue stamp glowed against the wood grain. I opened my phone messages and scrolled to the last demand from my brother's wife. Pay or leave. No exceptions. For the first time, I felt something other than exhaustion. A cold, steady anger. Not rage, it was sharper than that. I whispered aloud, "This ends now." Then I placed the documents back in the envelope, sealed it, and slipped it into my work bag. I made a choice that night. I didn't want to believe one folder of papers would be enough. Not with them. Not with the way my brother's wife could twist a story until up looked like down. So the next morning, after a 12-hour shift that ended at 8:05, I walked across town to a small office above a bakery. The sign on the door read, "K. Varga, Attorney." The hallway smelled of yeast and burnt sugar. My shoes squeaked against the linoleum as I entered. The lawyer was an older woman with cropped silver hair and glasses low on her nose. She glanced at the envelope I set on her desk, then at me. "Tell me everything." I spoke for 10 minutes straight, voice low, the hum of a copy machine filling the pauses. When I finished, she slid the notarized pages out carefully, running her fingers over the raised seal. "This is valid," she said. Her tone was precise, almost surgical. "Your mother registered the property as separate. This addendum was properly witnessed. Once you turned 30, ownership transferred to you automatically. That was 2 years ago, correct?" "Yes. I'm 32 now." She nodded once. "Then your brother has no legal standing. His wife even less. The apartment is yours." The words hit like air after drowning. "Still," I pressed. "Could they contest it?" "They can try." She adjusted her glasses. "But unless they produce a later will, the court will dismiss it." "Do you have the original deed as well?" I reached into my folder. There it was, a pale blue certificate with the cadastral number and my name typed in block letters, issued on March 14, 2021. The lawyer tapped it lightly. "This seals it. If they refuse to vacate, you may file for eviction. Deadline is entirely yours to set. I recommend 30 days. Long enough to appear reasonable, short enough to prevent further damage." I exhaled slowly, the weight of 2 years of silence lifting inch by inch. "Thank you," I said. She leaned back, folding her hands. "One warning, Alina. They will fight dirty. Threats, gossip, social media. Do not respond. Document everything. Send copies only through me." Her office smelled faintly of paper and strong coffee. I left with the folder pressed to my chest like a shield, the bakery's heat spilling into the stairwell. Outside, church bells struck 11 times, each clang like a countdown. The deadline was forming in my mind, 30 days. I walked to my car, sat behind the wheel, and wrote it into my notebook. Eviction notice, to deliver by Friday, 17th. Friday arrived cold and brittle. Frost rimmed the edges of my windshield, and the leather of my gloves creaked as I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. In the passenger seat lay a stiff brown envelope stamped with the attorney's seal. Inside, the eviction notice, copies of the deed, and the 30-day deadline spelled out in black ink. I parked on Korova Street at 9:55 a.m. The air smelled of exhaust and wet concrete. Their curtains were still drawn, a faint glow of a television flickering through the fabric. My stomach tightened, but my hands were steady. Step 1, I walked up the 4 flights. Each stair groaned under my boots. The envelope felt heavier with every step. Step 2, I knocked once, firm. The door opened partway. My brother's wife stood there in a robe, cigarette tucked between 2 fingers, mascara smudged beneath her eyes. "What do you want?" I held out the envelope. "This is official. 30 days. She snorted. "You're joking. You can't throw out your own family. This isn't a joke." My voice was level. "Read it." She took the envelope with exaggerated slowness, nails tapping the paper, as if stalling would change the contents. Behind her, my brother appeared, his expression carefully blank. Step 3, I turned without another word and walked back down the stairwell, my boots echoing. At the bottom, I paused, listening. A beat later came the sound of raised voices, sharp and muffled through the concrete. The envelope had detonated. By the time I reached my car, my phone buzzed. A message from her, "You'll regret this. This isn't over." I saved the text, screenshotting the timestamp, 17 February, 10:07 a.m. Proof. Step 4, I drove straight to the attorney's office, handed over a duplicate set of documents. "Delivered," I said simply. She glanced at the clock. "Good. Now we wait." That evening, I sat in my rented room with a cup of chamomile tea, the steam dampening my face. My phone lit up every few minutes, calls, threats, promises, then silence, then more of the same. I didn't answer. I saved everything. At 11:48 p.m. one final message arrived, "We're not leaving. You'll see." I placed the phone face down on the table. The tea had gone cold, but my mind was clearer than it had been in years. Upstairs, someone in another apartment was laughing too loudly at a sitcom. But in my chest, there was only quiet. On their side, shock had arrived. And it was only the beginning. The consequences began the very next day. At 7:22 a.m., as I was scrubbing my hands raw in the hospital locker room, my phone buzzed with notifications. Dozens of them. I dried my palms on the rough towel and opened the screen. There it was, a Facebook post from my brother's wife. A photo of their son sitting glumly on the sofa, captioned, "Some people forget blood ties. After all we've given, they want us on the street. Pray for us." Underneath, comments. Old neighbors, distant relatives, emojis of crying faces and folded hands. One cousin even wrote, "Alina always thought she was better than us." I swallowed the acid rising in my throat. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened the proof folder in my phone and saved screenshots. Timestamp, 18 February, 7:25 a.m. At lunch, while the cafeteria smelled of boiled potatoes and chlorine, I received a call from an unknown number. I stepped into the stairwell to answer. "You think a piece of paper scares us?" It was my brother. His voice was low, edged with something I hadn't heard before. "We're not moving. You'll regret humiliating us." 30 days, I said quietly. Then I hung up. My hand trembled, but not from fear, from finality. By the weekend, the ripple spread further. An aunt I hadn't spoken to in years texted, "What is happening?" "She says you're making them homeless." I typed one reply, "Legal matter. I won't discuss it by phone. Please don't worry." Then I put the phone down. Meanwhile, my attorney filed the notice with the district housing office. Case number 143725. She sent me the scanned acknowledgement. I printed it on the hospital machine and slid it into my folder. Hard proof. In their apartment, my apartment, their behavior grew louder. Neighbors told me music blasted until midnight. Pizza boxes piled up by the door. A way to show me they weren't afraid. But the more noise they made, the calmer I became. My evenings were quiet. I paid rent for my temporary room on time. I brewed tea, read a few pages of a novel, wrote down every detail in my notebook, dates, messages, witnesses. One small win came on the 21st. A neighbor called. "Alina, I saw your brother's wife screaming in the courtyard, saying you forged the deed." I told her I'd seen your mother's papers years ago. She went silent. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept deeply. It wasn't the end. But it was movement. The final gap closed 2 weeks later. I came home from a night shift on March 3, 6:40 a.m. The sky was still bruised with dawn. On my windshield, damp with frost, was a sheet of paper taped crookedly. I peeled it off, the glue left streaks. The note was typed in bold letters, "If you force us out, everyone will know what kind of daughter you really are. Don't test us." No signature. Just cowardice. I stood in the chilled air, the paper crinkling between my fingers. My breath fogged. Then I pulled out my phone, snapped photos front and back, timestamped, saved. Another piece for the folder. Later that day, my attorney called. Good timing. The registry office sent confirmation of ownership, official copy with seal. It leaves no doubt. When I picked it up, the document smelled faintly of toner and cardboard. The embossed seal was fresh, my name pressed into the fibers like an imprint of truth itself. Holding it, I felt the missing link click into place. That evening, my brother's wife launched her countermove, a TikTok video. Her face streaked with tears, dramatic music swelling. Caption: My cruel sister wants to evict us for money. Imagine throwing your nephew into the street. It gained comments within hours. Some strangers called me heartless. Others asked for context. For once, I answered. Calmly, factually. A single post on my own account. The apartment on Korova Street is my late mother's property, legally transferred to me in 2021. Proof has been filed. This is not a matter of opinion, it is documented fact. I attached a blurred portion of the stamped deed, enough to show legitimacy without revealing private details. Silence followed. Not instant, but gradual, like a fire running out of fuel. Comments dwindled. Relatives stopped calling. The narrative had shifted. When my brother tried ringing again at 11:13 p.m., I let it go to voicemail. His voice cracked through the speaker. How can you do this to us? We're family. I listened once. Then I pressed save. Because the truth was simple now, there was no way back. The eviction deadline was 6 days away. The deadline arrived on March 9, 10 a.m. I took the morning off work, wore a navy coat buttoned to the throat, and carried only my folder and keys. The courtyard smelled of damp earth and cigarettes. Their car was still in the lot, streaked with dust. When I climbed the 4 flights, the door was ajar. Inside, boxes and garbage bags lined the corridor. My brother's wife was pacing, phone pressed to her ear, voice sharp. My brother sat slumped on a chair, staring at the floor. Neither looked at me. Neither spoke. I stepped past them, into the living room. The walls were bare, the curtains yanked down. The quilt was gone. The air reeked of stale smoke and fast food, but beneath it, faintly, was the smell of rose soap. My mother's scent, like a whisper through time. I walked to the window, opened it wide. Cold March air filled the room. For the first time in years, I breathed without weight. They shuffled past me 10 minutes later, dragging bags, muttering about lawyers and betrayal. I didn't answer. I didn't stop them. I only closed the door gently behind them when the last footsteps faded down the stairwell. The key turned smoothly in the lock. My lock. That evening, I brewed tea in my own kitchen. The kettle hissed, the mug warmed my hands. I sat at the bare wooden table, notebook open, and wrote 3 lines. No lending. No silence. No guilt. Those were my boundaries. Not vows of revenge, not promises of war, just rules to live by. In the 6 months since, I've kept them. I work long shifts, but when I return, the apartment is quiet. I've repainted the walls white. I've planted basil in a pot by the window. I've paid every utility bill in my own name, on time. Some evenings, I stand barefoot on the balcony, listening to the hum of the city below. The cold air brushes my skin, but I don't shiver. I'm not waiting for the next demand. I'm not rehearsing the next fight. The space is mine, and so is the calm. And when I close the notebook at night, I remind myself, I don't owe anyone for existing. Just for living.